Okay, today we're going to start our colonization main idea discussion.
When taking notes, it's really important that you find a method that works for you. Last year, we noticed that several students had started to number their blanks on the side and then fill in next to the slide where they had more room to write in those blanks.
Also, feel free to abbreviate and use highlighters. These are your notes. Make them work for you.
We will be grading on the basis that you have filled in all the blanks. However, you can always customize your notes. We encourage you to star, highlight, draw arrows. Anything that we repeat or obviously stress to you needs to be outlined or highlighted in some way.
And that could definitely be a hint to you that that will be on the test. So you definitely want to make sure that you get it down, even if it's not a blank on your notes. Okay, so let's take a look at this map here that we have on this slide. Notice that the boundaries are different from what we know as states today.
What do you think formed that natural boundary there? Look at the map. What do you think formed that boundary?
If you guessed the Appalachian Mountains, you are correct.
It's a natural barrier.
Also, notice that Maine is not a separate colony. It is part of Massachusetts. I know, that's weird, right?
This was actually quite common for the colonies to claim other bits and pieces of land as their own, until much later when we became our own independent country and issues started to arise with the Northwest Ordinance that came to prevent this from happening.
Don't worry, you'll learn more about that Northwest Ordinance later.
That might have been confusing, sorry.
Okay, so by now, through your main idea activity that you did in class, you should recognize that there are 4 main reasons for colonization.
One is political.
Second one is social.
Third one is religious.
And the fourth one is economic. Okay? In other words, this is why our country came to be, the foundation of America.
Sounds awfully important to me. Make sure you know these: political, social, religious, and economic reasons.
So if these were my notes, I would highlight, star, or somehow stress to myself that I need to know these 4 reasons.
Okay, now let's look at these reasons individually.
Political freedom. Here is just a brief history of England. The rule of kings in England had changed drastically by the time of colonization. Efforts had been made to restrict the absolute power of kings.
In other words, the people fought to have representation and rights in the English government. We see the result of this effort through the Magna Carta.
This is one of the documents you need to be familiar with. This was the first time we see the formation of a representative assembly, like our Congress. I might write that down. Parliament is like our Congress.
Now there is one huge difference between Parliament and our Congress. Only the wealthy or property owners could vote for representatives or even serve as representatives. However, this did give us an example to use when we set up our Congress. The Magna Carta also stated that the king had to follow English laws. What concept?
Now, the Magna Carta held true for many years until the rule of the Stuart kings, James I, Charles I, Charles II, and James II. They believed in the divine right of kings. In other words, the king's power comes from God, and no one can disobey.
Otherwise, they will be disobeying God. They also ruled with absolute power, like a dictator. Whatever they said went.
So just to review real quick, we've talked about the Magna Carta and the divine right of kings. Those are really the 2 main ideas that we want you to get from this slide. Okay, to continue on. So people wanted to come to America to escape this harsh rule, especially under those Stuart kings.
And the divine right of king.
In the colonies, more people were able to own land and therefore able to vote and participate in government, because that was still a huge voting requirement that you own property in order to participate in government.
Also, being so far away from the king made it difficult for the king to keep the colonies under tight rule. Therefore, the colonies found their own way to govern themselves, which we'll talk about later.
And we'll talk about these specific things later as well. But here on this slide, we see the Virginia House of Burgesses, which again is very similar to our Congress. And in Massachusetts, we see the Mayflower Compact.
You know, as I said to my classes, and I'm sure Miss Bradley agrees with this, we're going to see here right at the beginning with the formation of these colonies that these colonial people are going to start becoming very independent, and it's going to be this independence and this self-government that will eventually lead to revolution. You can see it right here in this early formation of colonies.
Okay, and again, one big reason for that is because of how far away we were from the king. Okay, that really is going to start those ideas, those seedlings of democracy
And independence.
Social freedom is our next one. In England, you were born into a particular social class. It was extremely difficult to move out of your class. So, if you were born poor, you remained poor your entire life.
On the same note, if your parents were servants, you would be a servant, and your kids would be servants, and so on. There was no opportunity to move up that social chain.
America was a unique place because even though there was still a class system, it wasn't as strict as the European social system. Also, land was cheap. More people were able to own property, which was a huge step in moving up the social ladder.
Remember, land equals power. I would write that down. This is true even on a small scale for farmers. There was so much opportunity for people to move up in the social world in America.
It took us a while to get through this. There's lots of information here. And the beginning of it is the Protestant Reformation. In Europe, the Roman Catholic Church was really the only religion allowed to be practiced. Even kings and queens deferred, looked to the Pope for direction. In fact, sometimes decisions had to be made with the Pope's permission.
Now, of course, there were a very few, who practiced other religions, like Islam, Judaism, etc. But in some countries, you had to pledge your allegiance to the Catholic Church. Martin Luther, and no, he is not related to Martin Luther King, was a Catholic monk.
Monks spent lots of time studying the Bible and beliefs, and Martin began to question some of these beliefs. Pretty soon, he had had enough to write an entire paper about these protests he had against the Catholic Church.
This began what became known as the Protestant Reformation. You get it? Protest, Protestant? Pretty clever, I say. And so began the start of many new Protestant churches.
Some of these new churches had what some people consider to be radical beliefs, and therefore they were persecuted. They persecuted these people for those beliefs. So naturally, these people didn't want to stay and listen to all this harassment. And remember, in some countries, you had to join a certain church. So these people picked up and moved their entire congregation, that's their church group, to America.
We'll talk about some specific colonies soon.
Here's just an example of some of the beliefs that Protestants had compared to Catholics. Notice the location of the king. So here in the Roman Catholic Church, you've got the Pope, cardinals, archbishop, bishops, priests, and then I would even put the king right here. And then with the Anglican Church, you've got God and then the king. Okay, the king is at the top instead of the Pope. And then in the Puritan Church, you had God and individual Christians. There was none of that hierarchy that we see in some of these other churches.
All right, King Henry VIII. This is the man that started the whole Protestant Reformation movement and really gave it power behind Martin Luther.
And I absolutely love this story. By the way, there's a song on here that we'd like for you to listen to.
We're trying.
We're trying to stop that song. Okay. It looks like I'm just going to leave it like that. Okay, I absolutely love the story of King Henry VIII, who was a Catholic king. That is in the beginning. He married Catherine of Aragon, who was Spanish, and they had a lovely girl, Mary.
However, every king in the world wants and needs a son to be heir to the throne, and Catherine did not produce any sons for King Henry.
During this time, a lovely young lady, Anne Boleyn, came to Henry's attention. She flit and flirted with Henry and drove him mad with her advances. Eventually, she convinced him to leave his wife and marry her instead.
With the Protestant Reformation in progress, Henry decided to create his own church, the Anglican Church, one that would grant him a divorce, which the Catholic Church refused to do.
Once divorced, he married the beautiful temptress Anne Boleyn, and they had a lovely child, another daughter, Elizabeth. Unfortunately for Anne, she produced no son, and soon Henry was tempted again by a new lady, Jane Seymour.
However, he decided not to divorce Anne. Instead, there were rumors of some bad dealings involving Anne, and Henry used this to have her executed.
Off with her head.
Off with her head.
And now the widowed Henry married Jane Seymour, who gave him a son, Edward. Unfortunately, Jane died in childbirth, and Edward was quite the sickly child.
Therefore, Henry decided he must have yet another wife to produce another son. Anne of Cleves became the fourth Mrs. Henry VIII. She produced no heirs, and soon Henry became bored with Anne of Cleves, so he divorced her. What a surprise.
And soon Catherine Howard became the fifth Mrs. Henry VIII. However, once again, Catherine produced no heir to the throne. And Henry once again became tired of this new wife. But he didn't divorce her. Unfortunately for Catherine Howard, he decided it was time to head to the scaffold.
And off with her head.
And therefore he married Catherine Parr, because we know Henry by this time cannot be by himself. Catherine Parr became the last Henry VIII, not because she was killed. Fortunately for her, Henry VIII died before he could do any harm to her. So now let's review, if we could, on Henry VIII's 6 wives. So we have Catherine of Aragon, divorced, Anne Boleyn, beheaded, Jane Seymour, died, Anne of Cleves, divorced, Catherine Howard, beheaded, and Catherine Parr survived. Lucky for her. This is where we were.
Yes.
Okay. Economic opportunity. When you hear the word economy or any form of that word, you should automatically think money. In fact, I would write that down. Economic equals money.
As you can imagine, many people came to America to make money. Some thought they would strike it rich instantly with discovering gold. Others thought the land might provide other valuable resources, which it did in the form of tobacco. The land in the southern colonies was perfect for farming.
This is where we see lots of cash crops being grown. What do we mean when we say cash crops? If you said crops grown for money and not for food, you are correct. Land was extremely hard to come by in England. Really, only the wealthy truly owned the land. The lower classes had to rent the land.
Many individuals looked at America as a way to make money. Some came themselves and established a variety of businesses. Others invested their money into the startup of colonies and therefore made money off of these businesses. Monarchs did this as well.
Others invested their money. Did you say that already? Sorry. They would issue a charter establishing a contract between citizens and the king that would grant the citizens land here in the colonies in exchange for a slice of the profit pie. So, just like what we've said, let's just review. So middle and lower classes are coming over here to make money. And then, of course, monarchs, this whole idea of the colonies was to make money.
Remember, if you were born poor, you stayed poor in England. There was no way to move up that social or economic ladder.
Okay, so now let's break down the colonies and look at reasons founded. Now, of course, every historian is going to have a different opinion on why these colonies were founded. Textbooks, etc., will sometimes give you different information. This is where we believe the colonies should fit under the reasons founded.
Okay, for economic reasons, we've got Virginia, New York, Connecticut, Delaware, North and South Carolina, New Jersey, and Georgia.
For religious reasons, we have Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maryland, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Pennsylvania.
Social would be Georgia.
And political is New Hampshire, Georgia, Rhode Island, and New Jersey. Now, notice that some colonies fit under two reasons. That's because they might have fit under both categories there.